Philip Parris. Phil Lynott was an Irish singer and musician. His most commercially successful group was Thin Lizzy, of which he was a founding member, the principal songwriter, lead vocalist and bassist. He later also found success as a solo artist. Growing up in Dublin in the 1960s, Lynott fronted several bands as a lead vocalist, most notably Skid Row alongside Gary Moore, before learning the bass guitar and forming Thin Lizzy in 1969. After initial success with Whiskey in the Jar, the band found strong commercial success in the mid-1970s with hits such as The Boys Are Back in Town, Jailbreak, and Waiting for an Alibi, and became a popular live attraction due to the combination of Lynott's vocal and songwriting skills and the use of dual lead guitars. Towards the end of the 1970s, Lynott also embarked upon a solo career, published 2 books of poetry, and after Thin Lizzy disbanded, he assembled and fronted the band Grand Slam, of which he was the leader until it folded in 1985. He subsequently had major UK success with More with the song Out in the Fields, followed by a minor hit 19, before his death on January 4, 1986. He remains a popular figure in the rock world, and in 2005, a statue was erected in his memory. Early life: Lynott was born in Hallam Hospital in West Bromwich, England, and christened at St Edward's Church in Selly Park, Birmingham. His mother, Philomena Lynott, is Irish, and his father was Cecil Parris, was Afro-Guyanese. Some news and fan site sources said that Parris was Afro-Brazilian, but in an August 2009 interview his wife said that he was from Georgetown, British Guiana. This was confirmed by Philomena Lynott in July 2010. Lynott's mother met Parris in Birmingham in 1948 and they saw each other for a few months, until Parris was transferred to London. Shortly afterwards, Philomena found she was pregnant and, after Philip was born, she moved with her baby to a home for unmarried mothers in Selly Oak, Birmingham. When Parris learned of Philip's birth, he returned to Birmingham and arranged accommodation for Philomena and Philippe in nearby Blackheath. Her relationship with Parris lasted 2 more years, although he was still working in London and they did not live together. Philomena subsequently moved to Manchester but stayed in touch with Parris and, although she turned down a marriage proposal from him, he agreed to pay towards his son's support. Parris's wife stated in 2009 that Philomena also had a daughter and a second son with Parris, both of whom were given up for adoption. Philomena finally spoke of these children in July 2010, nearly 25 years after Philip's death, when the Irish Mail on Sunday and Irish Daily Mail ran a 12-page interview with her over 3 days. She revealed that her 3 children all had different fathers, and that her daughter was white. She had met her now-grown children, but they had never met their brother Philip. He knew he had a sister, but never knew he had a brother. Lynott did not see his father again until the late 1970s. When he was 4 years old, Philip went to live with his grandmother, Sarah Lynott, in Crumlin, Dublin. His mother stayed in Manchester, and later took over the management of the Clifton Grange Hotel in Whalley Range with her partner, Dennis Keeley. The hotel, nicknamed The Biz, became popular with show business entertainers, and would be later referred to in a song on Thin Lizzy's debut album. Music career: early years, Lynott was introduced to music by his uncle Timothy's record collection, and became influenced by Tamla Motown and the Mamas and the Papas. He joined his first band, the Black Eagles, in 1965 as a lead singer, playing popular covers in local clubs around Dublin. He attended the Christian Brothers School in Crumlin, where he became friends with Brian Downey, who was later persuaded to join the band from the Liffey Beats. The group fell apart due to the lack of interest of manager Joe Smith, particularly after the departure of his 2 sons, guitarists Danny and Frankie. Lynott then left the family home and moved into a flat in Clontarf, where he briefly joined Kama Sutra. It was in this band that he learned his frontman skills, and worked out how to interact with an audience. In early 1968, he teamed up with bassist Brendan Brush Shields to form Skid Row. Shields also wanted Downey to play drums in the band, but Downey wasn't interested in the band's style, so the job went to Noel Bridgman instead. The band signed a deal with Ted Carroll, who would later go on to manage Thin Lizzy, and played a variety of covers including 8 Miles High, Hey Jude, and several numbers by Jimi Hendrix. Because Lynott did not play an instrument at this point in his career, he instead manipulated his voice through an echo box during instrumental sections. He also took to smearing boot polish under his eyes on stage, which he would continue to do throughout Lizzy's career later on, and regularly performed a mock fight with Shields on stage to attract the crowd. In mid-1968, guitarist Bernard Cheevers quit to work full-time at the Guinness factory in Dublin, and was replaced by Belfast-born guitarist Gary Moore. Despite increased success, and the release of a single, New Faces, Old Places, Shields became concerned about Lynott's tendency to sing off-key. He then discovered that the problem was with Lynott's tonsils. He subsequently took a leave of absence from the band. By the time he had recovered, Shields had decided to take over singing lead and reduce the band to a three-piece. Feeling guilty of having effectively sacked one of his best friends, he taught Lynott how to play bass, figuring it would be easier to learn than a six-string guitar, and sold him a Fender Jazz bass he had bought from Robert Balla for £36, and started giving him lessons. Lynott and Downey quickly put together a new band called Orphanage, with guitarist Joe Staunton and bassist Pat Quigley, playing a mixture of original material alongside covers of Bob Dylan, Free and Jeff Beck. At the end of 2006 a number of Skid Row and Orphanage demo tapes featuring Phil Lynott were discovered. These were his earliest recordings and had been presumed lost for decades. Thin Lizzy. Towards the end of 1969, Lynott and Downey were introduced to guitarist Eric Bell via founding member of them, keyboardist Eric Rickson, deciding that Bell was a better guitarist, and with Lynott now confident enough to play bass himself in a band, the four of them formed Thin Lizzy. Rickson, generally felt superfluous to requirements by the others, left after the release of the band's first single, The Farmer, in July 1970. During the band's early years, despite being the singer, bassist and chief songwriter, Lynott was still fairly reserved and introverted on stage, and would stand to one side while the spotlight concentrated on Bell, who was initially regarded as the group's leader. During the recording of the band's second album, Shades of a Blue Orphanage, Lynott very nearly left Thin Lizzy to form a new band with Deep Purple's Ritchie Blackmore and Ian Pace. He decided he would rather build up Lizzy's career from the ground up than jump into another band that had big-name musicians in it. Due to being in dire financial straits, Lizzy did, however, soon afterwards record an album of Deep Purple covers anonymously under the name Funky Junction. Lynott did not sing on the album as he felt his voice was not in the same style as Ian Gillan. Towards the end of 1972, Thin Lizzy got their first major break in the UK by supporting Slade, then nearing the height of their commercial success. Inspired by Noddy Holder's top hat with mirrors, Lynott decided to attach a mirror to his bass, which he carried over to subsequent tours. On the opening night of the tour, an altercation broke out between Lynott and Slade's manager Chas Chandler, who chastised his lack of stage presence and interaction with the audience, and threatened to throw Lizzy off the tour unless things improved immediately. Lynott subsequently developed his on-stage rapport and stage presence that would become familiar over the remainder of the decade. Thin Lizzy's first top 10 hit was in 1973, with a rock version of the traditional Irish song Whiskey in the Jar, featuring a cover by Irish artist and friend, Jim Fitzpatrick. However, follow-up singles failed to chart, and after the departure of Bell, quickly followed by replacement Moore and Downey, led Thin Lizzy to near collapse in mid-1974. It was not until the recruitment of guitarists Scott Gorham and Brian Robertson, and the release of Jailbreak in 1976, that made Lynott and Thin Lizzy international superstars on the strength of the album's biggest hit, The Boys Are Back in Town. The song reached the top 10 in the UK, Ireland and Canada, and peaked at number 12 in the US. Billboard Hot 100 Archive, July 24, 1976. Having finally achieved mainstream success, Thin Lizzy embarked on several consecutive world tours. The band continued on Jailbreak's success with the release of a string of hit albums, including Bad Reputation and Black Rose, A Rock Legend, with Gary Moore, and remained a very popular act in Europe and North America, particularly after the release of the live album Livin' Dangerous in spite of various personnel changes. By the early 1980s, Thin Lizzy was starting to struggle commercially, and Lynott started showing symptoms of drug abuse, including regular asthma attacks. After the resignation of longtime manager Chris O'Donnell, and Gorham wanting to quit, Lynott decided to disband Thin Lizzy in 1983. He had started to use heroin by this stage in his career, and it affected the band's shows in Japan when he was unable to obtain any. Fortunately, he managed to pick himself up for the band's show at the Reading Festival and their last ever gig in Nuremberg on September 4. Later years, in 1978, Lynott was featured in Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds, singing and speaking the role of Parson Nathaniel. Lynott took a keen interest in the emergence of punk rock in the late 1970s, and subsequently became friends with various members of the Sex Pistols, The Damned and fellow Irish band the Boomtown Rats. This led to him forming an ad hoc band known as the Greedies. The band started playing shows in London during Lizzy's downtime in 1978, playing a mixture of popular Lizzy tracks and Pistol songs recorded after John Lydon's departure. In 1979, the Greedies recorded a Christmas single, A Merry Jingle, featuring other members of Thin Lizzy as well as the Pistols' Steve Jones and Paul Cook. The previous year he had performed alongside Jones and Cook on Johnny Thunders' solo album So Alone. In 1980, though Thin Lizzy was still enjoying considerable success, Phil Lynott launched a solo career with the album, Solo in Soho. This was a top 30 UK album and yielded 2 hit singles that year, Dear Miss Lonely Hearts, and King's Call. The latter was a tribute to Elvis Presley, and featured Mark Knopfler on guitar. His second solo venture, the Philip Lynott album, was a chart flop, despite the presence of the single Old Town. The song Yellow Pearl was a number 14 hit in the UK and became the theme tune to Top of the Pops. In 1983, following the disbanding of Thin Lizzy, Lynott recorded a rock and roll medley single, We Are the Boys with Roy Wood, Chas Hodges, and John Colon. Phil regularly collaborated with former bandmate blues rock guitarist Gary Moore on a number of tracks including the singles Out in the Fields, his highest charting single ever, Parisian Walkways, Back on the Streets, and Spanish Guitar in 1979. In 1984, he formed a new band, Grand Slam, with Dush Negel, Lawrence Archer, Robbie Brennan, and Mark Stanway. During 1983–85, Lynott co-wrote a number of songs with British R&B artist Junior Giscombe, although nothing was ever officially released and most remain as demos. However, one of the songs, The Lady Loves to Dance, was mastered with producer Tony Visconti and nearly released before being pulled by the record company, Phonogram. His last single, 19, released a few weeks before his death, was produced by Paul Hardcastle. It bore no relation to the producer's chart-topping single of the same title some months earlier. Throughout December 1985, Lynott had been promoting the track and this included performing live on various television shows. The same month, he gave his final interview in which he promulgated his possible plans for near future. These included more work with Gary Moore and even the possibility of reforming Thin Lizzy, something which he had privately discussed with Scott Gorham previously. He also recorded some material with Archer, Huey Lewis, and members of Lewis's band The News in 1985, which was not released. Poetry Books, Lynott's first book of poetry, Songs for While I'm Away, was published in 1974. It contained 21 poems which were all lyrics from Thin Lizzy songs, except one titled A Holy Encounter. Only 1,000 copies of the book were printed. In 1977, a second volume was released, titled Philip. Again, most of the 25 poems were song lyrics, except for Legend of the Vagabond, and the short piece of prose from the back sleeve of the Jailbreak album. In 1997, both books were brought together in a single volume, again titled Songs for While I'm Away. This compendium edition also featured illustrations by Tim Booth and Thin Lizzy artist Jim Fitzpatrick, and the original introductions by Peter Fallon and John Peel. Personal life. On February 14, 1980, Lynott married Caroline Crowther, the daughter of British comedian Leslie Crowther. He met her when she was working for Tony Brainsby in the late 1970s. They had 2 children, Sarah, for whom the eponymous 1979 song was written, and Kathleen, for whom the eponymous 1982 Lynott solo song was written. The marriage fell apart during 1984 after Lynott's drug use escalated. Lynott also had a son, born in 1968, who had been put up for adoption. In 2003, Magda Rahlam learned that Lynott was his biological father, and this was confirmed by Philomena Lynott in a newspaper interview in July 2010. Born in England and raised in Ireland, Lynott always considered himself to be Irish. His friend and Thin Lizzy bandmate Scott Gorham said in 2013, "Phil was so proud of being Irish. No matter where he went in the world, if we were talking to a journalist and they got something wrong about Ireland, he'd give the guy a history lesson. It meant a lot to him." Lynott was a passionate football fan, a keen Manchester United supporter, and United and Northern Ireland star George Best was one of Lynott's best friends. Lynott was also a team captain on the popular 80s BBC quiz show Pop Quiz, hosted by Mike Reid. Death. Lynott's last years were dogged by drug and alcohol dependency, leading to his collapse on Christmas Day 1985, at his home in Kew. He was discovered by his mother, who was not aware of his dependence on heroin. She contacted Caroline, who knew about it, and immediately knew the problem was serious. After Caroline drove him to a drug clinic at Cloud's house in East Noyle, near Warminster, he was taken to Salisbury Infirmary where he was diagnosed as suffering from septicemia. Despite regaining consciousness enough to speak to his mother, his condition worsened by the start of the new year and he was put on a respirator. He died of pneumonia and heart failure due to septicemia in the hospital's intensive care unit on January 4, 1986, at the age of 36. Lynott's funeral was held at St Elizabeth's Church, Richmond on January 9, 1986, with most of Thin Lizzy's ex-members in attendance, followed by a second service at Howth Parish Church on 11th. He was buried in St Fintan's Cemetery, Dublin. Legacy. Thin Lizzy regrouped for a one-off performance in 1986, with Lynott's friend Bob Geldof taking lead vocals, and subsequently reformed as a touring act in 1996. Each year since 1987, Lynott's friend Smiley Bolger hosts a festival for him on the anniversary of his death called The Vibe for Philo. A number of musicians perform at the festival annually, including Thin Lizzy tribute bands and, occasionally, former Thin Lizzy members. On January 4, 1994, just over 8 years after his death, a trust in Lynott's name was formed by his family and close friends, in order to provide scholarships for new musicians, and to make donations to charities and organizations in his memory. In 2005, a life-size bronze statue of Phil Lynott was unveiled on Harry Street, off Grafton Street in Dublin. The ceremony was attended by former band members Gary Moore, Eric Bell, Brian Robertson, Brian Downey, Scott Gorham, Darren Wharton and by Lynott's mother. The attending Thin Lizzy members paid tribute with a live performance. His grave in St Fintan's Cemetery in Sutton, northeast Dublin, is regularly visited by family, friends and fans. The statue appears as a magically animated version of Lynott in the popular Dublin set book series Skullduggery Pleasant. In April 2007, the 1996 film The Rocker, a portrait of Phil Lynott, which consisted mainly of archive footage, was released on DVD in the UK. In August 2010, Yellow Pearl was released. This is a collection of songs from Lynott's solo albums, B-sides and album tracks. The album comes with rare pictures of Lynott as well as an introduction to the album written by Malcolm Dome. In September 2012, both Lynott's mother and widow objected to Mitt Romney's use of The Boys Are Back in Town during his election campaign. In an interview with Irish rock magazine Hot Press, Philomena Lynott said, "As far as I am concerned, Mitt Romney's opposition to gay marriage and to civil unions for gays makes him anti-gay Euro, which is not something that Philip would have supported." Discography. Solo in Soho, the Philip Lynott album, Live in Sweden 1983, Yellow Pearl, with others, Jeff Wayne, Jeff Wayne's musical version of The War of the Worlds as Parson Nathaniel, Gary Moore, Back on the Streets, appears on Back on the Streets, Don't Believe a Word, Fanatical Fascists, Parisian Walkways, and Spanish guitar. John Sykes, Please Don't Leave Me. Gary Moore, Run for Cover, appears on Military Man, Out in the Fields, and Still in Love with You. See also, Gary Moore and Friends, One Night in Dublin, a tribute to Phil Lynott, Notable Instruments and Gear, Rickenbacker. 4001 Bass, Fender Precision Bass with Custom Mirror Pickguard, Ibanez Roadstar RS900, Dane Electro 6-string bass, Dan Armstrong Lucite bass, Fender Stratocaster guitar, Fender Telecaster guitar. See also, Black People in Ireland, List of people on stamps of Ireland, List of drug-related deaths, Notes. References, Putterford, Mark. Philip Lynott, The Rocker. Castle Communications. ISBN A1-898141-50-9A.